This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
World leaders gather in Japan to discuss global and regional issues. A special team formed to investigate the attempted coup in the Amhara region in Ethiopia. And Tunisia moves to reassure tourists after Thursday's terror attacks. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi, and with me is Raman Young with a preview of your business news.
Yes, indeed, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Projects worth nearly $3 billion agreed to at the first China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo in Changsha. And the quest to reduce carbon emissions is threatening trade in Kenyan flowers. We'll explain how in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs from around the world and Africa with Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, we start the program in Japan, where the first day of the G20 summit has wrapped up in the city of Osaka. World leaders gathered to find common ground on driving global growth and easing tensions amid the rise of protectionism. Our reporter Zheng Yibing has more.
Chinese President Xi Jinping calls for international efforts to build a fair, just, and non-discriminatory market environment on the first day of the G20 summit in the Japanese city of Osaka. Well, this meeting is held amid the complex and severe international situation. Xi Jinping calls for G20 members to work together at this year's summit. So let's take a listen to what he said.
We should build a fair, just, and non-discriminatory market environment, promoting the flow of technology, personnel, and information. We should maintain the integrity and vitality of the global industrial chain to promote complementary advantages and win-win cooperation. Countries should not close their door when seeking development, and neither should they artificially interfere in the market.
And he's calling on global economies to push forward reform and innovation, improve global governance, address development issues, and resolve disputes in a spirit of partnership. And for the joint efforts with other countries, the Chinese president also said China will take measures to further open up the market, expand imports, improve the business environment, ensure fair treatment for foreign companies, and press ahead with multilateral trade agreement negotiations.
Meanwhile, President Xi is expected to meet his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump on the sidelines of the summit. Beijing says a lot is resting on that meeting and its outcome.
The Chinese and American teams are in close communication on the preparations for the meeting. We hope the U.S. can meet China halfway so the meeting yields positive results. It serves the interests of both countries and the expectations of the international community.
Well, China's Foreign Affairs spokesperson said Beijing also is opposed to a $750 billion defense bill passed by the United States Senate on Thursday. The legislation has provisions to target China on issues from technology transfers to the sale of synthetic opioids. He said Washington should objectively and rationally look at China's development and not allow the bill to hurt China-U.S. relations. Well, earlier, Chinese President Xi Jinping also met with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Xi called on China and African countries to safeguard multilateralism while being the pioneer to achieving win-win development. The Chinese leader also noted Beijing is willing to work with the United Nations to promote third-party cooperation in African countries. African leaders spoke highly of China's contribution to the continent's development, adding they will work with China to defend the free trade system in the international community. Well, President Xi has also put forward a three-point proposal on building a closer community with a shared future between China and African countries. The first point is about mutual benefit. President Xi proposes that China and Africa become pioneers of win-win development in efforts to benefit more people from both China and the African continent. Secondly, China and Africa are to become torchbearers of opening up and cooperation to gather stronger synergy to support Africa's development. And finally, China and Africa are to become the defenders of multilateralism and make greater contributions to safeguarding the international order. Now, for more on China-Africa relations with regards to the G20 summit, we spoke to Dr. Francis Onditi, a Human Sciences Research Council Fellow with the African Institute in South Africa. Here's what he had to say.
I think there are two important factors that we need to know. One, the most powerful countries in the world, China and the US, they have a lot of multilateral cooperation with the sub-Saharan African countries. China in particular, the trading volume with African countries is ranging in the region of 220 billion US dollar. The US trade volume with sub-Saharan Africa is about 39-40 billion US dollar. So that is significant amount of resource investment that the two countries respectively have invested, or they are in trade relation with the African countries. So we are hoping that with the Osaka summit, two important things that are affecting the international economic trade now that might affect African countries. One is, the unilateralism. We've seen countries getting, more closer to themselves. US being one of the perpetrators of that in the latest, latest trend, and it's not a very good thing, because then when countries run away from multilateralism, we are likely to experience economic shocks, and particularly sub-Saharan African countries who don't have really strong economic base, they might have experienced that. But also there is also the other aspect of the trade wars. The trade war between China and the US that we've seen in the past few years, it's not something good for Africa. The trade volume that I said earlier, the 220 billion US dollar, for example, between China and Africa, it's likely to erode as a result of that trade war. The two mentioned problems that are affecting economic outlook right now, unilateralism and trade wars. I think if Donald Trump, President Jinping, and other leaders come together, they are likely to get some solutions to these problems. Don't forget China and US have been meeting almost more than 11 times, but they have not struck a deal. Maybe this is an important meeting where the ice can break. The G20 are they're controlling, of course, controlling much of the economic resources globally. But again, they also play a big role in developing norms, principles and, trading rules that guide the trade. And when rules, norms, and principles are well developed, then we're likely to see countries moving towards multilateralism, which is a desired end, because then even sub-Saharan African countries would benefit.
And turning our attention to some other news now, Ethiopia has formed a special team to investigate the coup attempt in its Amhara region and the assassination of its military chief of staff. The government says both events were designed to try and derail the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's reform agenda. CGTN's Coletta Wanjoy reports from Addis Ababa.
The team of investigators include officials from the Defense Forces, National Intelligence Service and the Attorney General's office. Dozens of arrests have been made in Addis Ababa in connection with the murder of the Chief of Military Staff, Sierra Mekonnen.
A corporal, Masafint Tagabu Mekonnen, that's his name, has been apprehended, and an additional 42 individuals, so together with him, 43 individuals have also been apprehended with various weaponry and planning documents. So as I had mentioned earlier, there's indication to show that, and this would also unravel itself related to the investigations as more details come out. But there was a larger attempt, which also included other levels of leadership as well. So these planning documents somehow also indicated that.
In the Amhara region where the coup attempt happened, 212 people have so far been arrested. Investigations have revealed that at the time of the assassination of the Amhara president and his advisor, the head of police and the region's force commander were held hostage. But the Prime Minister's office says they will continue with security sector reform.
As part of institution building and ensuring that the right people are there, that the public has got direct information from these entities, and that the perception of fear around these entities is kind of melted away. There has been a lot of re-strategizing and reshuffling. If anything, these efforts that had already been begun over the past year are going to be further. As I had mentioned earlier on about foundation building, this is something that's going to be strengthened as part of institution building.
The bodyguard who murdered the military chief of staff has now been identified and his photo shared to the public. Colette Anjoy, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Authorities in Tunisia are investigating the terror attacks that took place on Thursday in downtown Tunis. One person was killed and several others wounded in blasts targeting police and a police station. Authorities insist that tourist sites are secure. The attacks took place just months, though, before an election is scheduled to take place and amid the peak tourist season. The country is expecting over 3 million tourists this summer. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi has more.
The Judicial Counterterrorism Division announced that investigations into the twin terrorist attacks that took place in Tunis led to the identification of the individual who blew himself up near the back door of the premises of the Al Ghurjani Judicial Police Directorate. The country's premier said terrorists have failed to achieve their goal.
The objective of these attacks is to weaken the Tunisian economy and the democratic transition. We are firmly committed to combating terrorism. These terrorist groups have no place in Tunisia.
Some analysts have voiced concern about the impact of the attacks on tourism. In 2015, millions of tourists deserted Tunisia following the Bardo and the Sousse terror attacks.
The terror attack took place at the beginning of the tourism season. All indicators showed a very good season with over 9 to 10 million tourists expected. We hope that the state will react in the right way to prevent cancellations.
The Ministry of Tourism paid a visit to the main tourist area in Tunis near the bombing site. René Trabilsi asserted that Tunisia will overcome the crisis.
Tunisia is not afraid of terrorism. Thursday's twin terrorist attacks in Tunis are isolated and will have no impact on tourism in Tunisia. The security situation is under control.
A spokesperson for the Judicial Counterterrorism Division said the initial findings of the investigation revealed that the two terrorist attacks in Tunis are correlated. Authorities pointed out that the identity of the suicide bomber at Habib Bourguiba Avenue has not yet been identified, pending the results of DNA tests.
United Nations Secretary General and many heads of states have strongly condemned Thursday's terrorist attacks in Tunis. The international community has also expressed support and solidarity to the families of all those affected and to the people and government of Tunisia. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. The death toll from a DRC mine collapse rises to 43. And the UN Security Council reconsiders its drawdown plan for a peacekeeping mission in Sudan's Darfur region.
Economic data out of the country.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's take a look at news now coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The death toll from Thursday's mine accident has now risen to 43. Officials say the number could rise as search and rescue efforts continue. The artisanal miners were killed when two galleries above an open excavation pit collapsed. The copper and cobalt mine, which is located in Lualaba province, is owned by the world's largest mining company, Glencore. The Swiss mining giant said it has observed a growing number of artisanal miners trespassing at the site. It estimates that about 2,000 illegal miners gather at the site every day. Staying in the DRC, the World Health Organization says it is continuing with efforts to trace those who might have been infected with the deadly Ebola virus. Now, this comes as the organization faces security challenges in the affected North Kivu province in eastern DRC. And speaking in Geneva while briefing journalists on the situation in the Great Lakes nation, the WHO Assistant Director General for Emergency Response, Ibrahima Sochefal, also said major urban centers in Butembo and Katwa are now witnessing only sporadic cases of infections. He attributes this to the 33 health centers that were recently set up.
Since the beginning of the outbreak, we have recorded 2,284 cases and 1,540 people died from the disease. But at the same time, we have 637 people who survived the disease, and I think this is important.
Well, let's bring you the latest now on those developments in the DRC. We're joined by our correspondent, Chris Ochamringa in Kinshasa. Chris, let's start with that mining accident. Of course, we understand the death toll has now risen to 43. Just give us an update on the search and rescue operations at Glencore's mine.
Well, authorities in Kolwezi city in southeastern DRC say they have recovered 7 more bodies in the mining site where the accident happened yesterday. That has brought the death toll to 43. Yesterday they reported there were 36 miners who died. Now the governor of the area fears that there may be more bodies buried in the rubble, and so he said that there will be, the search and rescue operations will go on. Most of the victims of this accident were illegal miners who have been operating on a site owned by Glencore, and the company issued a statement condemning the incident and asking people to be more careful about taking such risks. And so that is the latest that we have from Kolwezi.
And Chris, let's turn now to our ongoing coverage of the Ebola outbreak in the DRC. Health officials, as we understand, were scheduled to meet on Friday to discuss the possibility of deploying and testing a second Ebola vaccine. Can you give us more details on this meeting?
Well, the meeting did indeed happen in Kinshasa. All the major players who have been participating in this response of the Ebola outbreak gathered here to discuss about the use of a second Ebola vaccine. Now, over the past couple of months, there has been a consensus among health experts that there's about the need to introduce another vaccine, because they're saying that the current vaccine, which is made by a U.S. pharmaceutical company, Merck, has been very effective in treating patients, especially those who are vaccinated, in the first stages of contracting the disease. But they said it's very risky to be operating with only one company with such a highly infectious disease. If anything happens to Merck's administration, then there'll be a crisis. And they all agree that there's need to have a second vaccine. And so what happened today is that we had companies. We had 2 Russian companies, one from the United States and a Chinese company called CanSino Biologics, that made presentations about the efficacy of the Ebola vaccines that they have produced, hoping that the DRC government and the health experts can decide to pick their vaccines to start treating Ebola patients. Now, the meeting is going to end tomorrow. That's when we'll know, we'll get a sense of the direction that it's taking, but the final decision will be made by the DRC government. The health minister is going to meet the government and explain to them all these different presentations made by the 4 companies, and then the DRC government, along with international experts, will make their pick. And so we will update you on that as the development happens.
Well, thank you so much, Chris Ochambringa, joining us there live from Kinshasa. Meanwhile, a team from the World Health Organization and Uganda's health ministry officials have been assessing one of the high-risk districts for the Ebola virus in western Uganda. The quick response led to stemming the further spread of the viral disease from neighboring DRC and has drawn praise from the WHO.
Uganda shares a nearly 900-kilometer-long, often porous border with the DRC, where Ebola has claimed more than 1,400 lives since August 2018. The WHO delegation recently toured the Kasese DRC border area with the Minister of Health of Uganda in the wake of confirmed Ebola cases in the country.
There's been a lot of investment in the preparedness, first of all, and this response now, they've been able to mobilize a lot of capacity, work with many partners. All the intervention areas that are necessary have been put in place here, and we've seen that we have not seen an increased number of cases, so we're very, very optimistic that this is a very effective response.
Since the 11th of June, when Uganda declared the Ebola virus disease outbreak, there have been 3 confirmed cases who have come from the DRC.
We appreciate the investment that's gone into making sure that the system is up and ready to deal with patients when they arise, and we can only commit to continuing to support until the risk from across the border in the DRC is over, because we have to keep up these arrangements, this team at the ready in case somebody else is referred for them to treat.
More than 100 people who had contact with the confirmed cases are being monitored. Since the outbreak was declared, 1,063 high-risk individuals have been vaccinated, necessitating the ring vaccination for contacts of contacts.
So even when we don't have any Ebola cases in Uganda, even when we no longer have suspect cases, we shall still remain in a response mode, because we've already had Ebola confirmed in the country, and we cannot declare an end to the outbreak because there is a potential outbreak still on the other side.
During her 2-day visit, Dr. Moeti traveled to Bwera Hospital near the border with the DRC, where 2 of the 3 people who had the infection had died. A further 3 suspected cases are being treated at the hospital. Due to its investment into preparedness, the hospital can now obtain presumptive results to test for the Ebola virus strain within 2 hours. With support from the WHO and partners, Uganda has trained more than 16,000 community leaders and volunteers in remote border areas. There are currently no new confirmed cases of Ebola in Uganda. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
The UN Security Council has agreed on a 4-month pause in the drawdown of a peacekeeping mission in Sudan's Darfur region. Military leaders in Khartoum and an opposition alliance leading protests have been trying to come up with an agreeable political transition after the ouster of former President Omar al-Bashir. The Security Council unanimously voted to renew the mandate of the UN African Union mission known as UNAMID until October 31st. The Council last year had agreed to push ahead with a series of phased drawdowns with the view to shutting down the mission by 2020. Deployed in 2007, UNAMID now has about 7,200 troops and police, down from the 16,000 sent to Darfur at the height of the conflict there.
If there is no improvement in the situation in Darfur, we'll find ourselves in the same predicament at the end of October as we are now, unable to continue with a responsible and sustainable transition from peacekeeping to peace building in Darfur.
France has always been in favor of a responsible and cautious withdrawal of UNAMID, depending on the situation on the ground. In order to call for the end of the mission, we need a legitimate government recognized by the international community.
In Libya, about 700 African migrants have been trapped in a detention center northwest of the country. While access to the facility has been severely limited, migrants are accusing humanitarian agencies of abandoning them. CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports.
Each day, a few are given just minutes to rush out to a faucet with a couple of buckets. They fill them with water and bring them back for the others to drink.
We are in prison. They transfer us, instead of evacuation, they transfer us from detention center to detention center. And we are affected by different diseases. And we are now close to the clash area and the front line. So we need evacuation now. Urgently, we need evacuation.
According to the migrants themselves, more than 20 have died from disease and hunger. EU-funded aid agencies say they have little knowledge of the situation.
The access that we have to the people in acute need, refugees stranded there because of the situation, that access is severely limited by war. You know, there is often a lot of talk about Libya, forgetting completely that this is a country that is in the grips of a very vicious war between factions. It is a country where entire parts of the territory are controlled by rival gangs.
This facility and various others operate with minimal oversight from government bodies. They are run by militias who have been accused of human rights abuses and torture. At least 6,000 migrants have been locked up in dozens of these detention centers.
We're calling for the UNHCR, we're calling for the OIM, we're calling for the world, for the humanitarian organization, for all the world, for all brothers and sisters. Please help us, please help us, please save us.
The Zintan's reputation is so bad that migrants refuse to be sent here, even if they are from other detention centers caught in the crossfire between Libya's factions. After photos from inside the site emerged in June, UNHCR managed to evacuate 96 migrants from a separate building at the facility.
If there is anything that we don't do enough of, it's because we don't have access. It is not because of lack of will and not even because of lack of resources. Access in Libya is the fundamental obstacle to saving more lives.
The suffering of the migrants held at Zintan underscores the impact of the EU's effective yet much criticized migrant policy. Africans are blocked from sailing across the Mediterranean to EU shores. Funded and trained by the EU, Libyan border guards are stepping up their efforts to prevent migrants from crossing. As a result, thousands of migrants remain trapped in a country in turmoil. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Let's go to South Africa now. While Cape Town's water levels may have stabilized, the municipality is taking no chances and has been granted the go-ahead for a costly preventative plan to help ensure Cape Town does not near ground zero in the future. The city is implementing a 10-year plan to conserve water and not just be dependent on collecting rainfall. According to the city councillor, the financial budget has already dedicated a large amount to the water strategy to put procedures and augmentation schemes into place. Currently, there are 2 desalination plants, both at 7 million litres, operating at capacity. The plan is to build a plant that can hold 50 million litres of water, as well as have other strategic systems. The project is estimated to cost around $410 million.
The city's new water strategy, which was approved by our City Council at the end of May, sets out a plan to ensure that Cape Town becomes water sustainable and water sensitive in the long run. And this essentially means that we are looking at ensuring greater water security by investing in alternative water supply solutions, particularly from non-surface water solutions, so desalination, drilling into aquifers, the treatment of wastewater for drinking purposes and other operations as well. And then most importantly, ensuring ongoing water demand management and water conservation initiatives, such as removal of alien invasive plant species in our catchment areas so that we can maximize on runoff. All of this is entailed in our 10 to 20 year strategy, which was recently approved.
Recapping your top stories this hour. The first day of the G20 summit has wrapped up in the city of Osaka in Japan, where leaders gathered to find common ground on driving global growth and easing tensions amid the rise of protectionism. Earlier, Chinese President Xi Jinping met with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Xi called on China and African countries to safeguard multilateralism while being pioneers of win-win development. Ethiopia has formed a special team to investigate the coup attempt in its Amhara region and the assassination of its military chief of staff. The government says both events were designed to try and derail the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's reform agenda. Authorities in Tunisia are investigating the terror attacks that took place on Thursday in downtown Tunis. One person was killed and several others wounded in blasts targeting police stations. Authorities insist that tourist sites are secure. The attacks took place just months before an election is scheduled to take place, and amid the peak tourist season. The country is expecting over 3 million tourists this summer. And in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the death toll from Thursday's mine accident has risen to 43. Officials say the number could rise even further as search and rescue efforts continue. The artisanal miners were killed when 2 galleries above an open excavation pit collapsed on Thursday. The copper and cobalt mine, which is located in Lualaba province, is owned by the world's largest mining company, Glencore. And those are your top stories at this hour. And let's now go to Raman Yang for your latest business news.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in business. Projects worth nearly $3 billion so far agreed to at the first China-Africa Trade Expo. We'll also be looking at some of the unintended consequences of trying to cut carbon emissions. Kenyan flowers are firmly in the crosshairs.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Projects worth nearly $3 billion have been agreed to at the first China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo. That event attracted more than 10,000 participants, including traders from 53 African countries. The 3-day event features seminars and exhibitions on a whole range of issues: agriculture, trade, infrastructure and construction. Now, the expo was set up to provide a platform for deepening economic and trade ties between China on one hand and Africa's more than 50 economies on the other. Our reporter Li Jianhua brings us more from Changsha.
When we look at the official figures, the trade volume between Africa and China stood at around $200 billion. But for Hunan and Africa, the trade volume between the two places stood at only around $3 billion. It's not a lot, but if we look at some other details, Hunan is very developed in its machinery industry. They have the Sane, they also have Zoomline, the agricultural machinery that is very much needed in Africa. This is part of the reason. And also, don't forget the hybrid rice in Hunan that has been feeding about 1.4 billion Chinese people. Now it has found its way in Africa. So all in all, given all of those important reasons, that's why Hunan has been chosen as the eternal venue of the expo. Chinese and African officials and leaders have given their opinions as for that they would do whatever they can to further cooperation. Now let's hear what they have to say.
China is the largest developing country in the world, while Africa is the home to the largest number of developing countries. Now, China and African countries have many common features in transforming their growth model, improving people's life, and conducting practical cooperation. We have a strong desire for cooperation.
This first China-Africa Trade Expo could not have been held at a better time than now, when we have a shared vision for the prosperity of our peoples.
So we do see the firm belief in cooperation between China and Africa, but in the meantime, there are a lot of challenges along with opportunities, of course. There are over 50 African countries, and for each individual country, there are different difficulties and challenges they have to deal with.
Now, in Beijing, CGT and Wang Mingjun sat down with Namibia's Deputy Foreign Minister to discuss cooperation between China and the Southwest African nation.
Under the FOCAC framework, a series of tangible cooperation projects have been carried out. So looking ahead, what's your expectations on these implementations?
I must say that the cooperation between China and Namibia has not started with FOCAC. It has started way back during our struggle for independence, when China assisted Namibia to gain its independence. And FOCAC is just a pace setter towards our development trajectory. In September last year, we have signed several agreements on the construction of the satellite data receiving ground station. China would construct 4 rural schools. So under infrastructural connectivity, Namibia is busy facilitating itself as a logistic hub. We want to smoothen trade between Namibia and our neighboring countries.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has raised the 5-No approach in establishing relations with Africa, including the no interference with Africans' development path. So what's your take on that?
The provisions of our Constitution of Namibia, Article 96, provides for the non-interference and non-alignment of Namibia into the affairs of other countries. So what the President of China has said or has undertaken is also linked with our Constitution. And because of the interference of other countries and other nations, we have moved several steps backward. That has caused us to fall into abject poverty, that has forced us to fall into the non-education of our young people. But now we are seeing that Africa has started moving towards the development trajectory. And we stand firm behind the President of China, who said no interference. It will be good if every other nation and every other country also follows suit and do not interfere into the affairs of Africa, so that we determine our own destiny.
Right, then a bit of company news. Airtel Africa shares, they were down by as much as 15% after the debut on the bourse in London. Now, the shares hit a low of 85 cents to the dollar against an initial public offering price of about $1.24. Now, that comprised 744 million new shares, setting the deal size at about $754 million and the initial market cap at just under $4 billion. According to data reports, global IPO volumes are down about 30% so far in the year, down to a fairly reasonable number, about $62.8 billion. Telecoms firms in Europe have been plagued by tough competition, unfavorable regulation, slowing growth and rising costs of network upgrades as well. The benchmark Stoxx 600 index as well has rallied by more than 13%, but the sector as a whole is down about 3% so far in the second quarter. On to the business of extractives. Royal Dutch Shell and ExxonMobil, they're looking to go back into a market that they were in at least 2 decades ago, Somalia. And this is coming ahead of a bid round for oil blocks that are coming up for auction sometime in the fourth quarter. Now, the oil firms had joint ventures in that country prior to the toppling of the dictator Mohamed Siad Barre in the early 1990s. Somalia currently does not produce any oil, but there is some interesting seismic data that suggests there may be significant hydrocarbon reserves offshore. Now, the country has been mired in insecurity in the wake of frequent attacks by the Islamist group Al-Shabaab. A potential bid for 15 offshore blocks has been scheduled for November. A roadshow will take place in late September or early October. Somalia has also passed a revenue sharing agreement that will ensure a split in revenue with oil producing states. Now, in a quest to slow down climate change and its effects, the world is hoping to be at least carbon neutral by 2020. European countries are threatening to reduce flower imports from countries that do grow their flowers in greenhouses, which one argues that are largely responsible for the largest deposits of carbon emissions. 4 in 10 roses sold in the United Kingdom are imported from Kenya, and they provide vital jobs that keep thousands out of poverty. So reducing imports might be good for the environment, but at the same time, it could have a devastating impact on workers. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with more.
Roses are a universal symbol of romance. But have you ever wondered where they came from? A love affair with fresh flowers has led to a booming market in Kenya, where goods are flown to Europe to be sold in supermarkets. However, environmentally cautious governments are pushing to cut carbon emissions, which could affect the Kenyan flower industry. The Oserian company is based just north of Nairobi in Kenya's Rift Valley region and employs 4,500 people. The farm grows, packs and moves 1 million stems every day, all of which will be flown to Europe, with 60% of them going to the UK. Workers at the site are worried they will lose their jobs if demand declines.
If this factory wouldn't be here, we will lose a lot of jobs because most of the people are here, they are hardly working, they are here to earn their living. This is where they depend for their school fees, their basic needs, and everything that they need in their homes. This is where they get the money to support themselves.
Oserian provides free housing for staff alongside free childcare and schools for their dependents. The free facilities are on what they call an estate, which houses around 11,000 people.
If the factory couldn't be there, we'll lose a lot because most of our kids are there. If you see, we depend on that factory actually. Yes, everything is all about that factory.
Oserian currently uses 100% green energy. They're hoping to be carbon neutral by 2020, but the footprint of daily air freights stands in their way. If European shoppers started to boycott Kenyan flowers in an effort to reduce their carbon emissions, the farm may be forced to downsize, leaving many workers and their families without an income.
You could see some of our projects here are funded by big supermarkets in the UK. So we are fond of this market and we wouldn't want to lose it. And I wish they could appreciate their contribution to this market and how much that has made a difference. So the carbon footprint conversation should not be just air miles. There's much more.
It's a catch-22 in the quest for curbing climate change. On one hand, we need to save the planet. On the other, livelihoods are at stake. It's hoped that with innovation and policy reform, both can be achieved by 2020. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
A Kenyan businessman based in Dar es Salaam has been reportedly abducted by gunmen. He was making his way home with his wife from a school meeting on Monday night. The unknown gunmen are said to have cornered the couple in an upmarket neighborhood of Oyster Bay. Tanzanian police, for now, are still investigating. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with the latest.
In first-hand testimony, Veronica Kunya says that her and her husband were coming home from a school meeting when they were approached by at least 4 men. She says one of them had a shotgun and held it to her head. CCTV cameras show 3 cars, 2 motorbikes, and more men arriving along the couple's Land Rover Discovery Sport. After driving the couple to another part of the area called Msasani, they reportedly removed Raphael to another car and left Veronica in her car and left. Veronica says she was told to wait for further information. She didn't leave the area immediately, and that's when she received a call from Raphael with instructions from the abductor to go home.
My phone was called, like actually my husband called at that moment. And then he was like, Vera, you're told to go home. And I was like, because I saw the guy there, I thought they're just around the corner. So I was like, I want to stay here, I want to be with you. And he was like, no, you're told to go home.
Veronica says she went straight to the Oyster Bay Police and later to the Kenyan High Commission. The Kenyan High Commissioner to Tanzania, Mr. Dan Kazungu, has confirmed the incident, saying they are working with the local authorities to ensure a speedy resolution. Ogandi has been running a transport business between Dar es Salaam, DRC, Congo, Zambia, and Rwanda.
So we just want him back. Yeah, I personally want him back. Right now, I have faith in God, and I know that you know, I know that, you know, there will be an end to this. I just pray that it's going to be a good one.
So far, investigators have released no information about any demands concerning Ogangi or his release. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
One last story for you. The global ride-hailing firm Uber is in talks with regulators over plans to expand into 2 West African countries and provide a boat service in the Nigerian megacity of Lagos. The chief business officer at Uber, Brooks Entwistle, says that discussions are on with regulators in Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal about launching possible services over there as well. Uber has some 36,000 active drivers across sub-Saharan Africa. They operate in a range of countries in East Africa and South Africa, but the company is largely absent from West Africa, except for Nigeria and Ghana. It does face quite a bit of stiff competition in African cities from the Estonian ride-hailing firm Bolt, which until early 2019 was called Taxify. Bolt has grabbed business largely by taking a much smaller cut of revenues from drivers using its app.
We're looking at, of course, the waterways here, which are very interesting to us as it relates to, you know, potential service that may include the great geography that you have here. We spent yesterday a meeting with a bus company, Lagos Bus Company, to think about what we could do with buses. But in general, we work inside whatever frameworks the regulator and the government provide.
And I'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. We'll be looking at this year's G20 summit that just wrapped up its first day in Osaka in Japan. What are the issues on the agenda? Trade, global issues around military formations and so on and so forth. We'll have the latest on that and plenty more coming your way at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, though, back to Lindy.
Thank you so much, Rama. Well, let's take a short break. Still plenty of news coming your way.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's journey to the far reaches of China's northern Inner Mongolia, where our correspondent Tian Ranhe attempts to master the art of raising camels. Along the way, he discovers just how important camels continue to be for the survival of those living in this desert region.
Located among the deserts of North China's Inner Mongolia is Alashan Right Banner. It's home to 60,000 Bactrian camels, earning this place the moniker of Camel Town. Here, the land is all but impossible to farm, and so for thousands of years, the locals have raised camels for a living. We've come during their busiest time of year, calving season. Oh my god, yeah, there is a little camel right there. In fact, there are 2 newborn calves, though we must approach cautiously in case their mothers lash out at us. For camel herders, each calf is a new addition to their family. They treat them as they would a beloved pet, stroking and kissing them to get the calves accustomed to human touch. Normally, camels will remain in the desert for 2 weeks after giving birth, but this leaves the calf vulnerable to wolves and other desert predators. So we need to bring them back to the pen. It's okay, it's okay. Ow! It's okay, your mummy's right there, it's right there. This little camel's heart is absolutely racing. I mean, you would be too, right? If you're... if these random strangers showed up to take you home after you've just been born. It's a good workout. Oh, ooh, ooh. Misha. Okay. Ooh. Oh, poor baby. Understandably, the mothers aren't so keen on us taking away their calves. Camels form strong bonds with their offspring, who stay with their mothers for 3 to 5 years until they reach sexual maturity and can have calves of their own. Successful mission. We got the little ones back home. Whew. In the past, camels were used as pack animals, but these days they're increasingly kept for their milk. Unlike dairy cows, a calf has to suckle first before the mother camel will lactate. Contrary to popular opinion, camels are highly intelligent, emotional animals. It's believed that, like humans, they too can shed emotional tears, especially if their calf should die. Proof that there's nothing as strong as a mother's love. Tiran He, CGTN.
Well, time for a short break. Your sports news up next. Coming up, Morocco coach Hervé Renard returns to haunt his former team, Côte d'Ivoire, in the Africa Cup of Nations.